Welcome to the Think Forward podcast, where we speak with futurists, innovators, and big thinkers. Come along with your host, Steve Fisher, and explore the future together.
Welcome, friends and fellow big thinkers. In this episode, we will delve into the mind of someone who has not just seen the future, but has been meticulously crafting it. His path has taken him from pre-med to graphic design, through the rave scene, and into the world of speculative design and strategic foresight. His experiences span from nonprofits in Washington, D.C. to innovation labs in San Francisco, GE, and McKinsey. Currently, he's shaping the future by teaching the next generation of design futurists. In this episode, he shares his journey, including a pivotal moment in Japan that deepened his understanding of speculative design. We'll explore his new book, Making Futures Work, which blends foresight, design, and strategy into a guide for future innovators. He'll explain the critical role of speculative design in navigating uncertainties and his experiences at McKinsey co-creating the futures practice. Expect to learn about integrating futures thinking into organizations and the importance of the right language and advocates for transformative work. His insights will inspire and equip you to start your own journey on the future. It'll be an episode filled with humor, wisdom, practical advice, and a glimpse of what the future could look like if we dared to dream bigger. Welcome to episode 107. Speculative Futures with Phil Balagtas. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you. How's it going, Steve?
Good to see you, my friend. It's been a long time. Always good to catch up and share with the audience here about you. Excited to talk to you today. So let's start with personal journey. So could you tell us about yourself and your background? Let's start with that so people don't know you.
Yeah, I've been tossing around this idea of who I am. Who am I today? But I can tell you who I've been for a while. I'm a designer. My undergraduate degree is in graphic design. And at first I was supposed to be a doctor. So I was in pre-med for a little bit and I dropped out and became a raver for a little bit. And then I went back to school for graphic design. And then I moved to California from DC. I was born and raised in Virginia. And after I graduated, I was working in and around the Washington, DC area. And I got fed up of working for like nonprofits and government institutions there. And I went to do what I thought was more exciting stuff. So I packed up all my things and moved to San Francisco, California in 2007. I worked as a web designer there. I never quite went into print and heard about this thing called user experience and was trying to get a job as a UX designer. I couldn't quite land it. So I went back to school and got my MFA in design in 2009 or 2011. And was a digital designer for a really long time, doing everything from like websites to user interfaces for all kinds of devices, from like mobile, iPad. I did kiosk for a while. I worked for a vending machine company that it was like a robotic vending machine company, and they had a little user interface on it. So I was a GUI designer, graphical user interface designer for a little bit. And then I worked for GE and was doing a lot of interface design for large industrial businesses like oil and gas and power plants. And then I made my way into aviation, which I remember we had this common thread where we were both working for aviation for some time. I moved into a design director position for GE Digital Aviation. So I had started a team there, teaching them how to use design thinking, doing some innovation projects, working closely with airlines. And then I went to McKinsey, where I met you and a lot of other really amazing people. And there I was just working across industries as a design director and learning more about strategy. And that's where we built our foresight team together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then after McKinsey, after the pandemic, I had just a moment of reflection, as many people did after that, and decided I was going to start writing my book, traveled the world for a little bit, and thought that I was going to be able to write my book in these exotic places on the beach. And that really wasn't a very practical idea, which I discovered very quickly. And then moved to Barcelona. That's where I am today. I guess I'm still a designer at heart, but I guess I'm also a strategist and a futurist.
Yeah, as a futurist, when did you find that spark? You're known for speculative futures. I first came across you giving a talk at Google. Early on with, I would say, the earlier speculative design crew, like Stuart Candy, Jake Dunnigan, yourself, like I would call the early people. And I've been a futurist for a long time. And as a designer, I never knew there was like this kind of confluence, or there was a thing for that? Where did you come to like speculative design? Like, where was that your like spark? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I left that part of the story out. When I decided to go back to school to get my master's.
That's my job. I bring it back. So, you know.
I forgot about that part of my life. When I decided to go back to school for my master's, I was really interested in doing a master's just so I wanted to get a job as a user experience designer. And I didn't really know what design thinking was or even just how to do basic research. And I really wanted to get smart about one thing. And I'd had some friends who were doing their theses and PhDs. And I was like, I really want to do that. So I found a school in San Francisco called the California College of the Arts. And they had a thesis program that was 2 years long. And I knew I wanted to do something related to the future, but I had a very myopic view, a very sheltered view of what futuring was. Like it was based on what I'd seen in science fiction or read in science fiction. And it was all about like robots and interfaces at that point. Really didn't know much of anything else. So in the first year, you have this moment to figure out what you want to do. And at the time I was working for this robotic vending machine company, and they had a network in Japan. It was the most successful brand that we had. It was for this like skincare product. And I didn't know what I was going to do for my thesis. And I convinced my company to send me to Japan to do some research on our vending machine product. And then I said, send me out there to do research. And then I'm going to take two weeks off and just roam the country and try to figure out what my thesis was going to be. I was literally just going to walk around like Tokyo because I thought at that time that's where the future was. And that's what I did. I just went on a walkabout, spent a lot of time in Akihabara, Electric Town, and a lot of time in train stations and bus stations because our vending machines happened to be there. That's where all the other vending machines were too. And I was doing a lot of research at the time. I saw this documentary called Objectified, and they had interviewed Dun Raby in it. And that's the first time I'd seen or heard critical design. And I thought it was just so mind-blowing and that it was design, but it was such a weird form of design I'd never seen before. It made me feel weird, but the concepts that were embedded in how they were looking at the future were pretty profound to me. And I was like, wow, if I could do something like that, would be amazing. It had a provocation, a discourse around it. It was just super creative. And so that, along with just being in Japan, and I had discovered this smart vending machine that had just appeared when I was there. It just launched, and it was this machine that had a webcam on it, and it was using machine learning to watch people order drinks. And it was mapping them out so that if you were at 5 o'clock, if you were just look just like every other man that was ordering coffee at that time, it would suggest coffee. And just the concept of a machine kind of identifying you and aggregating you into this like category of people was really profound to me as well. And even though I didn't want to come back and say like, I didn't want to have a smart robotic vending machine as my like research project, that was the launch into how could I think about the implications of a particular type of technology in the world and push that forward and think about all the other things that could go wrong or well based on what this thing was doing. The idea of like identity and people as a number or as like a personification of something. That's what it started. And I just did a bunch of research and experience from there and had found all these other projects from the Royal College of Art where Dun and Raby were leading the Designing Interactions program. That was launched into the world of futures.
So there's two words in your explanation. And I think for people, provocation and implication, right? Mm-hmm. Those are things that extend out. Or you mentioned also you felt uncomfortable, felt different, like when you reacted to it. And I think that aspect of design, you think about art in general, right? These great artists in their time have provoked and really challenged what the status quo or the things that you think about and the mental models we build for things. How would you just define speculative design for those? Because it's a term many may not have heard before that are listening. How would you define it?
God, you think that
there's no right answer. It's just your interpretation, just like an artist, right?
Yeah, you think after so many years of talking about this, that this question would be easier and easier to explain, but it never is for some reason.
I find it gets harder. I find it gets harder over the years because more gets added into it, or its definition mutates. That's what
It's definitely mutated. The term speculative design has grown out of critical design. And when Dunn and Raby were first doing their work at the RCA, that was known mostly as critical design. And as their work became critiqued by other people, it inherited this speculative and critical design term. And then it shortened into speculative design. So speculative design still refers to this provocative type of work that was coming out of there, where was this borderline between, and I don't necessarily like this perspective of it, but it was this borderline between art and design, or it was meant to provoke or to stimulate a conversation about the future. At the time, it was really about alternate futures and radical futures. And it wasn't necessarily designed as something that was meant to be built. It was meant to ask a question about, is this the future that we want or we don't want? And there is a number of really great designers / artists that came out of there. One particular artist designer that I've referred to for so many years is Aggie Haynes, where she was really interested in manipulating the body and how humans have tried to manipulate the body for a really long time. And her project, Transfigurations, which became really a very seminal piece of work for her, was around designer babies. And how might we design our children if we had the ability to, which we do, and the need to design our children to work longer hours and hotter temperatures due to climate change, or to be able to modify their health needs or whatever it might be through manipulation, through surgery, plastic surgery, and now even through modifying DNA. So if we had this ability and need, would we do it? And she designed a few different children, like fake babies. And this was her project. And it wasn't meant to say, this is the future that we want. It was meant to say, is this the future we want? It's not meant to say, this is the future that's coming. It's meant to ask, is this the future that we want? And just spur a conversation about it. So we can think about ethics and moral concerns and policy and the kind of the advancement of technology and the biological sciences and medical sciences and those kind of things. And so this speculation of what the future could look like is what kind of became the notable characteristic of speculative and critical design, if that makes any sense.
That's a great definition. It's a great way to explain it to people, because when I try and explain it, I always talk about what you don't think of the future will be, because it's supposed to provoke the unknown. That it's the unknown unknowns. It's like the things you're not thinking. It's where people come together to come out with different ideas and turn them into known unknowns, and also to work backward. Like I think in the practical sense, I think of like diabetes management. What is an insulin pump? What does diabetes management in 2035 look like? What are the devices? What are the things that we would have to do? Is it a bionic pancreas? Is it an insulin embed? Is it, and then it lets someone, and this is a practical sense, right? It's like you can think of IDEO's work on grocery carts from, oh, wow, I could actually put like the carry carts in the grocery cart, and they can I never thought of that. It's okay. How do we work back from maybe a pilot or a simplified design that takes the speculative into the real? And I always find and sometimes it can't, but if it just provokes the like you said, it provokes the thought, but it definitely impacts innovation and what people do. And if you think back to your career, when you think about your interest in innovation, you can be innovative now, but like some nonprofits usually sometimes constrained by funding, as it all is. But how is that kind of innovation angle for you influenced your approach to design? Like, how do you weave it in together? Do you work with that?
Yeah. And I'm glad you gave those examples, because that I think is the more modern definition of speculative design, that it's not tied so much to just critical, provocative discourse thinking anymore. Now it's like anything you can speculate that's possible and can be more useful. And this is the flag that I've been bearing for quite some time. I've always been interested in innovation. I didn't really know that's what it was until I got into an actual group that was doing innovation. I was in an R&D group at GE, and we were working with emerging technologies and stuff. And it was great to be in a place where you could think big and about any possibility, and just sometimes it would actually become real and sometimes not. But as I was just being a designer and just trying to think about future products and services, I was still interested. I wasn't quite formally using futurist thinking in my work because I was too nervous that people wouldn't understand it. It felt like an academic university thing. And it wasn't until I started really experimenting with using the methodologies in a real like design or innovation setting or strategy setting where I started to realize that it could be useful, that speculating about the future doesn't have to be this art project, that it can actually be about anything. And that's where I really started to experiment with it and just kind of smuggling these methods into these workshops and thinking about the impact, the implications of potential technologies or events and what that means for the near and the long-term future. And really found a practical use case for this thing that was once just like a thought exercise.
When working with you, I think about our work and how we had to integrate it. And it often reflects back on my journey as a product builder, product creator, doing product management. Even though I've been interested in futures since I was 13 and I was doing futures work, I always called myself like a self-futurist. I found it made me a better product person to know how to do trends work, how to do scenarios, but not be like overt and this is a futures project because most people can't. I think COVID's changed that for a lot of people in terms of the uncertainties, but pure futures, if you will. When you look at the time horizons, I explain it to people now, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is that product owners, product officers are on an 18-month roadmap horizon. They may look at strategy where the innovation officer is looking 3 years out, and then the strategy of the futurist is going farther. So there's a thing that trickles down within the innovation agenda into the actual like products that make it through the stages in the pipeline. Would you agree that do you bring in your futures work and not just a straight out pure like futures project? You just bring it into your work in just other ways? How do you do that?
I 1000% agree. A lot of the case that I try to make with futures work is that it's what we already do inherently. We're already doing it to some capacity. I also try to make the case that futures work doesn't have to be this specialized thing that you only do 10 years out in the future, that it's actually the methodologies and tools are things that could be used for a very near future as well. And yeah, I think that anybody can really, one, they're probably already doing it. They don't know it, or they're just doing something that they didn't realize there was a tool for it or a methodology around it. But I think that anyone can make use of this process for whether it's thinking about very high level 10-year strategy, 5-year strategy, or product roadmap, or even just near term. Like there's so many trends and patterns in the world that are constantly changing very quickly. And you can get ahead of these things if you're really just doing the work. All you have to do is have a process and try to have some sort of like understanding of how to analyze signals and patterns in the world. And just by having that knowledge, you're that much smarter or more adept than your competition might be, if that's what you're trying to do. But yeah, I think it's very useful. And I think that one of the hardest things about futures that I've discovered, and one thing that we both discovered at McKinsey, was that it's sometimes difficult to sell it because people think it's this weird science, especially if you've got designers trying to sell this thing. It's this like weird science that either looks too much like an academic exercise, or it's so far in the future, or you're using vocabulary that they can't understand. But it's really not that hard.
Yeah. And that's a great segue. I was about to jump into we'll call it our collaborative experiences together, co-creating the futures practice at McKinsey. There's a couple of statements I use with a lot of people is that McKinsey's a great firm. There's some issues and other things. We don't have to get into that, but the general purpose of McKinsey is to help clients think creatively and differently in the immediate. Like we get paid, I used to say McKinsey gets paid a lot of money to tell people what to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
Not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now. And a lot of people are like, I'm not even gonna have a job. I don't care. Like I need to fix this quarter.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of effectiveness and purpose in that, right? But at the same time, when you build systems for perfection and then something like COVID comes along and snaps it like a twig in 45 days, it puts the antennas up for people. Like you have to think differently. You have to think not just so reactively. And I think that's, to me, the paradigm of futures work is that it helps you think proactively as terms of what the future becoming the present eventually, what that possible future would be. So yeah, I'm curious because you were the original, you were the, what I would call an organizational futures, you were the original evangelist. And you were getting on the mountaintops, doing the presentations while being billable to clients. And so tell me about your journey when you came to McKinsey, the thrust of that. Did they hire you knowing you were a design futurist? Did they know that big part about you, or did that just come?
I think they like to hire people with very diverse backgrounds who are Olympians in a lot of different things, that they have a lot of passion and goals and other things. So I told them about my nonprofit and the community that we'd started and some of that other work, but I didn't use it in my interview process. I basically just had to prove that I knew how to do strategy. And even doing that I didn't even know what the hell I was doing. I was just showing them some work that I did. I didn't know who McKinsey was when I got the call. I had a friend that worked there and he was like, hey, we do aviation. Come and work for us for a year. Try it out. You can work for some airlines. Okay, cool. I'll try it out. And I walked in and I literally had to Google design strategy. So embarrassing. Like a couple of weeks before the first interview, I was like, what is design strategy? And I figured out like, I've been doing this. So here's the story I'm going to tell. And I guess I told a good enough story. But what a great moment, I think, for all of us, because we were able to, they had done, from my research, I was there for a year, okay, before I actually even murmured the word futures to anybody. And I was still doing my public speaking on the side, just doing that stuff and not really talking about it internally. And I really had to do this investigation. And I talk about this also in the book. Like, you really have to understand your climate and the audience in your organization before you start walking in with this stuff. Because if you just stomp in with, I've got this toolkit and it's going to solve all these problems and you guys should be doing it because it's awesome and you're good, you could definitely rub some people the wrong way. And we found this out a little bit through our journey. But
we also found great sponsors in check, but we did find some real wonderful people, partners that saw the value, because they also saw it could help them build their client relationship and it could also help them bring in more billable projects.
Yeah, there was a little bit of a perfect storm for us to do this. You might have been one of the first people that reached out to me.
I think I was, because I joined, and I think within you know what it was? Sorry for the listening. I will keep the acronyms away, but there was an organizational meeting of designers. It was a get together and I met a bunch of other people. It was probably about 4 months in. And I share this because I think those in organizations should do this. If you have designers, you should have this kind of summit if your people are all distributed. I met the tribe. I met other people that were interested in foresight. I'm like, I'm not the only one. And I'm like, for the first time, I felt that I could do that. And I talked to Sarah, Sarah Cinnamon, if you're listening, you're awesome. She's, you need to meet Phil. And I brought your talk and I was like, she put us together. Then you and I started to talk about what a practice like this, it doesn't exist. Yeah. And McKinsey's a wonderful place where it's make your own McKinsey. They encourage you to create value in that way. So there was this, you have to find the sponsors, you have to find the supporters. You can't just blindly go out because you have to be billable. But it was a really great experience because it wasn't just in an organization doing the thing. It was ability to do a lot of different things. And you're right, the perfect storm, that was in 2019. And there's this thing in China that was starting to happen. And then for me, when it hit Seattle, I'm like, okay, we all moved online. But what it did was, I remember the one project we did, the future of patient experience, for a client, that was huge because people did not know how to react to this. They did not know what the future may be. And it became a perfect storm where all of us started to put together the offering. And I share this with the audience too, because I want to hear about your journey with this and how as we started to connect everybody together and make this ragtag team. What did you start to feel? What did you see? What were your experiences during this?
It started out with Charlie Herzl, I think. He was a senior industrial designer and he was launching this newsletter called Tiny Trends every 2 weeks. And him and a couple of other colleagues were just looking at trends, consumer trends. And I think he was really interested in consumer packaged goods. But it was just a tiny newsletter and it wasn't really fancy. And he would send it out. And I was like, hey, you're doing trend work. I do this thing called Futures. I introduced it to him. I said, why don't we collaborate on a newsletter and do a Futures newsletter? And so we did. And it was just like a 4 or 5 page newsletter. And we sent it out just to the design team. We figured this would be the first audience to it. And we even explained like why we're doing it, what the process is like, and here's a provocation. And we were looking at digital nomad and trying to understand like what the future of that concept would be, compounded with renting of personal goods and minimal living. And what would it be like for someone to move from city to city without having to take all their stuff with them and have your insurance follow you and have like businesses rent stuff to you instead of you having to take stuff with you. You could just rent things and then leave a city and then go to another place and rent your stuff. And that got a lot of attention internally. And then we got asked to do a second one. And then we teamed up with McKinsey Global Research, MGI, McKinsey Global Institute, the research arms. And they had just put out this big report on digital identity. So we were like, why don't we partner with them, use their data and their research, and then do another provocation. And this time we branded it so it looked like a formal report. And then that got outside the design team and that started to get noticed. Then at the same time, contacted me and 2 or 3 other people who had just finished a Foresight course also contacted me and was like, oh no, it's just Lucy, I think.
My I had a business case presentation to get it. And then because I met her at that summit and she's, can I see it? And she got it. And we all did the certification at Houston.
Right.
That week-long one. Yes. And then, exactly.
Yep. And right when the pandemic hit, we just started talking. We're like, let's do this thing. And we just started to have some downtime and really just mapped out everything we had to do. We're like, okay, we got to put a deck together. We have to have a process. Let's start to create the offering. Let's start to build a team. We started a Slack channel. People started joining the Slack channel. And people started getting, and I forgot what other activities we had, but a lot of momentum just took off during pandemic. And then we pulled together a team with some kind of leadership support. We had a partner saying okay to it, but we did it under the radar. And some people got in trouble for it too, which I'm sorry that they did. But we had like 30 designers at one point. I remember you even did a training. Remember we did a couple trainings?
I did a lot of training. We did a lot of, I feel like there was, and this is for people that are listening that are trying to get futures into their organization, is I find that there's usually 3 groups. There's the true believers, as I would say, we and Lucy and Kurt and Sebastian and it's like trying to think of his name
Charlie.
too. I'm like Charlie and is, I'm going to be embarrassed. But the rest of the team was able to find the things that they're good at and then come together to do all the things collectively. Yeah. And then that's the true believers. The second layer is, I would call them the futures adjacent. Those are the people that want to be involved in the project, but they are doing other things. Like that, it's one of the things that they do. And then there's the third, which I call them futures interested. They're on, and you set up Slack channels for that. So you could get people that are interested. They want to keep up with things. They want to touch the sun, feel the warmth of the sun in that way. And I feel those layers, and sometimes they progress, people move toward that. But that's a real way to get people futures literate and futures fluent, and training people because they'll do it in their own work. And if you can bring that into the DNA, and that was 2 parts. For one, we're bringing the DNA into a firm like that. And then you're also trying to bring it into a client that may not have it. And you're trying to convince them. Some get it, some don't. But that leads into this book, this amazing book that you've written, and getting the tone out there. And I'd love for us to spend the time on the podcast here and really get people to know about what your journey writing it. And it's called Making Futures Work. So talk about the themes and the concepts you explore.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to mention one other big learning.
Yeah, please.
Building the Foresight team. And you're right, like having the collective leadership and having people who really wanted to volunteer and do these different things to build the practice. And at the time, I didn't want to call it a practice, but that's what we were doing. We were building a practice, basically.
Yeah.
And so it took that, having a core leadership team and also having those different levels of people who are interested and engaged. But I remember when we were trying to brand it and pitch it to other people within the firm, we were like, okay, it's going to be called Foresight by Design. That's what we're going to call the offering. We had this deck that outlined
everything. It was designed by Foresight. It was DXF, designed by Foresight.
It was Foresight by Design first. And then we started talking to people.
That's right. Sorry.
We started talking to the strategists, the intro strategists, people who went to school for strategy, the business analysts and all those people. And we started to get pushback because they were threatened by this word strategy. And someone has said this to me a long time ago. They're like, be careful how you use this word inside here, because this is what we do and people are going to get threatened. And we decided to change it to design by foresight. So the design came first and we were owning it. And we just left out the word strategic. And that allowed us to get more conversations with people because of how it was positioned on the surface. I think it's a huge learning. Like, we had to really understand the vocabulary, align ourselves with the vocabulary that was being used internally, and like use that as, like a Trojan horse, and start to get all these conversations with people. And I think that was part of the success, but as well as having a great group of individuals on the team, but also executive leadership. We had partners who were sponsoring us, and then we had people who were doing the work, trying out methods on projects, and being able to speak to it and saying, yes, this stuff works. It's super useful and everyone should be doing it. So that was just another huge learning from that journey.
It's great. It's a great point. I would just say to that is that you get the people who believe in it, but at the same time, you also have to understand the politics of language, the politics of the organization. You're right. You have to find those. There's those who will be your advocates, but there are those who will be your adversaries.
Yes.
And you have to be aware of both.
So, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Super important.
Yeah.
Anything.
The book is awesome book.
Where do I start?
Main themes, like what inspired you? What kind of compelled you? Like, this burning inside me must come out of my body onto this Macintosh in front of me.
A lot of it had come from, I've been doing so many intro to futures talks over the years, the Futures 101, and people just really, really being inspired by it and wanting to know more. And I'd always show this slide of books, and there's 10 books on there, and included like Dun and Raby's book. It had some foresight books, some strict foresight books. It had Emmy Webb's book, Signals Are Talking. And I could never quite find the book that was at the right level that talked about it in the way that I was talking about it, where I was merging foresight, design futures, speculative design fiction, all of that stuff, and strategy. And quite in the way that I'd been talking about it. And I always wish there was one I could just be like, yeah, here, start here. This is a good starting point for you. And then you can graduate and read some of these other really amazing books too. And it's not that those books were like written at such a high level that like it wasn't for everyone. It's just that some of them really, it took you. Yeah, there wasn't a book that was out that I could just give someone as a primer for futures. I felt, and at least not in like the way that I was talking about it and in the stages of the process that I had been talking about it, with foresight plus design futures plus strategy. And so I just always wanted to write that book, and I never really had the courage to do it. And at the end of 2020, I decided to. And at first I was writing it I was just trying to understand what kind of book I wanted to write. And I wasn't quite sure the level of language I wanted to use. I just didn't know what to do. I just knew that I wanted it to feel accessible and not be too academic or theoretical or use a bunch of jargon. And even though the book does have a lot of like jargon, I wanted it to be something that wasn't too hard to understand or explain, which is how I'd been doing my talks for a while, using a lot of analogies and examples and stuff. So that was the book I wanted to write. And I didn't know if I wanted to get it published by someone or self-publish it. And I started writing, and I was just like, I'm just going to try to start writing. And it was so difficult. I tried starting in different places, and just, I knew that I'd been doing this for a long time, and I just wanted to get what I was teaching onto paper, basically. And I knew that I was confident enough that I had a framework that I could put down. But once I started writing it, like putting those things into words, and then realizing, I've got to do more research on this thing that I talk about because I want to know the history of it. And then I couldn't just get into the flow. When you're a first time writer, I guess for some people, it's just, you can't get into that state, that flow state where things are just coming out of your head. Like I had to think about like how I'm going to say it. Like I was trying to treat it like a design problem. Like how would I want the experience of this book to be so that it's the most effective? And all of that, and plus my perfectionist brain, made it difficult. But that was the impetus for it.
You talked about the challenge part of the writing process, but what are the themes and the concepts that you explore? What are the main things that somebody there's, I would say for maybe the futures fluent people, but a lot of people who are maybe just designers. And this is an opening, like what are the themes and concepts you explore? What do you look at?
Yeah, I do have to give some credit to Lou Rosenfeld, who I worked with for a few months. He was going to publish it on on Rosenfeld Media for a while. And then he dropped me around the time of the recession, but he helped me really flesh out the table of contents. So thank you, Lou. And then after that, I went to O'Reilly and they decided to pick it up. But it starts off with kind of a brief history of how we as a species have been futuring, like way back till the first cave paintings, and how we have tried to understand the world around us and try to recognize patterns of the world so that we can survive, whether they be like animal migration patterns or weather patterns, or just how we would like navigate the world. And I talk a little bit about maps also and how we've tried to create maps again, all through time to help us navigate into like uncertain waters to try and reach certain goals. And then different examples of how people have illustrated the future through science fiction or through just painting and those kind of things. And just that whole first chapter is not necessarily like a history of futuring. It is. There are really great examples there, but it's meant to show you that we have been doing this for all our lives. Like the entire existence of our species has been about trying to understand the future and survive and navigate. So it tries to set up these examples of how this is not a new framework. They're just different tools and labels to things and some processes that will be more useful for you. But the mindset of understanding the future and trying to predict it and trying to survive in it has been something we've been doing for forever. And then there's probably way too much. It's a thick book. I didn't expect it to be so thick. But
how many pages is it?
It's clocking in at about 400. But the reason it's so thick is because there's lots of pictures in it. And there's lots of illustrations of frameworks and lots of stories from the field. So I interviewed like over 20 different people across different organizations from like Lufthansa, IBM, Google, and then also small studios that are either specifically doing futures work or are using the process. And so there's lots of really great stories in there. And yeah, so basically there's a sort of a primer telling you about the stages, and it starts the first stage, which I don't even know if there should be stages or phases or if I should even have had a label to it. But the first chapter, the first few sections is really just about preparing yourself and your audience for futures work and really trying to understand your audience, the climate, the environment, the problem, and all of that before you start to even go into the future, the mindset, getting the futures mindset and all of those kind of principles for futuring. And then it goes into strategic foresight and talks about trends and horizon scanning and analyzing and prioritizing trends and then creating scenarios and thinking about world building and just the fundamental pieces of what foresight really does. And then it goes into design futures. So now that you've created and understand the worlds, potential worlds of the future, how do you visualize or design future products and services or future initiatives? Through speculative design fiction and science fiction prototyping. These are the three that I'd selected. Just doing my research and trying to figure out all the different types of design futuring that existed in the world. These happen to be the most popular, the ones that I ran into the most. Science fiction prototyping, which was really coined by Brian David Johnson, who used to work at Intel. I didn't hear a lot about, but I started hearing more about it in places like Japan for some reason. And it turned out to be significant and specific enough in the use of science fiction narrative and storytelling to think about the future as opposed to creating an artifact. Like this is the thing that's going to exist in the future, or this is the scenario. It really makes use of like science fiction narratives, comic books, pictures and words, those kind of things to draw out a scenario. And then tying it all together in the last chapter, which is strategy. So now that you've envisioned the world ahead of you, you've envisioned a potential future product or service and create a North Star out of it, either something you want to go towards or something you want to avert from. How do you create a strategic roadmap towards that place? And really connecting both short-term and mid-term goals to this future vision and measuring them and monitoring indicators and measuring success along the way and really fusing in everything that I'd learned around strategy and just kind of design in general by creating minimum viable products and small experiments today but everything pointed towards that future vision. And then I think in the final chapter, I talk about how to integrate to your organization, which comes a lot from what we learned at McKinsey and from what I've learned from other people who've tried to bring it in to their group, whether you're a consultant or an in-house designer, and whether you have a place that's already practicing futures or a place that doesn't practice it at all, and you want to introduce it into the system.
Who did you talk to for the organizational side and when that's going? Like what people have done, experiences?
They're all over the place. Let's see. There's a story from IBM, Michael Kenny and Gabriela Campagna, or actually her last name is Lanning now. They started at the IBM Austin office, the design HQ in Austin. And there's a story about how they were trying to introduce speculative design there. They had found each other at the break room, which had the shared interest, and started experimenting with it. And they ended up teaming up with an internal magazine and then getting the attention of the VP, running this large workshop with a bunch of engineers, creating 75 pieces of IP, which ended up going straight into the patent office, them being assigned a legal and patent team. And it just talks about their journey of like how it went step by step and teaming up with different people and then getting this tension of executive leadership and then getting this IP team. And that's one of them. There's others. There's a story about GE, how an innovation team was formed for GE Transportation, the freight industry, the locomotive and freight industry, how they formed a team. They created a 10-year roadmap. They did a lot of experimentation. And they really started, that's one of the best case scenarios where you have a lot of air cover. A team is specifically created for you to practice this stuff. And you're given that responsibility to do that big, long roadmap for the company. And then other things where people have tried to start it and failed and had to course correct just to make it work.
So looking at with the book coming out and where things for us have gone since you started and then our journey together at McKinsey, let's look at the next 10 years in the field, like design futures. Where do you think it needs to change or there needs to be work done? Where do you think things are going?
The thing that I'm saying more of these days as I am watching the field evolve, and maybe I'm a little bit biased because I'm a little bit too close to this industry community practice, but I see this work not becoming continuing to become this separate practice, this separate field of work. Mm-hmm. I feel like people are still going to be designers and they're still going to be strategists, but it's going to start to fold into everything else that we do. And there might you already start to see more roles out in the world for the design futurist or the speculative designer. Still not that many, but there are more now than there used to be. But I think that it's going to become part of our toolkit, that you're not just going to have to be the person who can design the thing for the immediate tomorrow, but you're going to have more of a strategic long-term toolkit, and you're going to have to be able to prove, or you're going to have that capability to be able to analyze patterns and trends, which will hopefully be augmented by AI. I see a more optimistic future about the use of AI in futures work, and that we're just going to be stronger strategic designers, and we'll have a more important role to play in those kinds of situations.
Yeah, great answer. I agree with you. I think there's a level of futures literacy and democratization of futures thinking. Just like design thinking was democratized a decade for the last, it's just part of your toolkit. It's part of your problem solving. That this is the same. It's part of your approach. And you're right. There will be people that, what's that?
No, you're right. And if we look at things like how design and research has splintered, it used to be information architecture, human-centered design, and how that has splintered and specialized into now there's the design researcher. There's research ops and design ops. There's probably going to be a future where there's futures ops as well. Mm-hmm. And very specific, just the trend researcher. There are lots of trend researchers out there today, but there's probably going to be more specializations for that as well. But also just generally for design, I think that it's going to become part of our primary toolkit also.
So if you think about the length of your career as a designer and even before, what's the one thing you've learned? Let's talk about some kind of personal advice and insights. What would you learn in your career you wished you knew when you started all this?
Oh man, you're going to ask that question.
That's what I do. So many questions.
There's so many. I'm constantly like, nowadays, living in Barcelona and doing the thing that I really am passionate about for a living, I have to stop and look around and be like, how did I get here? This is really a dream. There's some things that I just never thought that I'd be able to do. And I look back and like, what would I have told myself in the past? What's the one thing? Could I have done something differently in the past to get here faster? Or I don't know, changed myself from getting worried or upset or worrying about anything if I knew this was going to be my future? I think I've always been in this spot where I felt like I've been alone, where I felt like I'm the only person who's thinking about this thing or wants this thing. And I feel like sometimes it's really hard to get the point across that this is important work. This is meaningful to someone. And I might not be able to always explain it correctly or to the best effectiveness, but it's really important. And sometimes I just really want to give up. That's what happened after grad school. I gave my thesis speech and no one really batted an eye. And I felt like I'd failed and I gave up for a few years until I decided to start the nonprofit in the community, which was like 5 years later after I graduated. But I think the one thing is like in all those moments where you feel like you are going to fail or you have failed, is to just keep going. If you really believe in something, and you might not be great at explaining why you believe in it or why it's so important. But if you really still feel in your heart that you believe in something, you should just never give up. Because then one day it's going to you'll figure it out and it's going to matter and it's going to have impact and it'll mean something to you at that point.
Well said. I think the reflection of time is that time does prove out a lot of things. If you just have to keep going, and you may be a little bit ahead of your time, or people may have to catch up with you, but eventually you can usually be proven right. And I think many people listening probably would share that sentiment, but great advice, things you learned. So as we start to close, a few things I like to talk about with people, the rapid fires, but let's put our futurist hat on. What are the things like with futurist technology? What do you think? Let's have some fun. So it's just a speculative design thinking. So what's one piece of futuristic tech that you think will become a reality? What would it be and why?
I've been trying to think of this question for quite some time, and I still feel like it's my child science fiction persona that's still stuck inside of me. But I think I would love to see a day where teleportation is possible. I know that I don't think I'll ever see it in my lifetime, but I never thought that I'd see flying cars in my lifetime either. And that's going to happen pretty soon. Or it's happening now, but if not teleporting an object, like if not teleporting a human, like in Star Trek's transporters, but like just teleporting an object would be just such an amazing thing to see if we could do that. And of course, interstellar travel would be amazing too, if there is anything beyond the simulation that we're in right now. And there's lots of new ideas of how to travel cheaply and more efficiently through the stars with different kinds of engines, like ion engines and solar sails and all that kind of stuff. But there's nothing that has seemed really practical yet, like the fabled warp engine. The concept of warp drive has been thought about for some time, and there's a theory out there. But still, the amount of power that you need to be able to do that is still
You're talking about the Alcubierre drive, if I pronounce it correctly, the Alcubierre drive that creates the warp bubble.
Yeah, the warp bubble, which seems like it makes sense. I don't know, but I think there's so much that there's so many unknown unknowns of we are just fish inside of the fish tank. We still don't realize that there's an outside to the fish tank. There's still like things that we can't even imagine that are probably possible that we just have no perception of. And so I guess my answer to that is that thing that I don't know would be amazing to see. Something that's so surprising that hasn't ever been written in the science fiction books or seen on screen or in a book. That's the thing that I would love to be surprised about.
I'm often reminded of Arthur C. Clarke's quote. I'm going to paraphrase it, is when you see something that's technology that's so radical from the future that it looks like magic just because you don't understand it. Like if you showed television to somebody 200 years ago, they think there was like witches or many people like you. It's just the technologies of today. You're absolutely right. So like you come across a lot as an artist and you see a lot of different provocations, a lot of different things. What are your what's been the most unexpected source of inspiration that's helped you, like influenced you? Unexpected, the things you wouldn't think of, but it's really influenced your work.
Recently, my students, I've been teaching at university for 4 years now. I started back in 2020 teaching undergrad at Tec de Monterrey. And then I'm teaching a master's in design and innovation program now at ELISAVA University here in Barcelona. And you would think that being a teacher, it's just a one-way conversation where you're just teaching people, you're guiding them through a process or a curriculum and you're answering questions and stuff. And yeah, of course, you would expect there to be some great ideas here and there. But I think it's not about the ideas that the students sometimes come up with. It's just seeing the way that they think. One, being surprised by the stuff that they come up with. That's an amazing experience to just see someone teach you something. But just like the way that they come to an answer or a perspective or a speculation has been really inspiring. And I've used a lot of what I've learned from them today. And just the capacity for some of them to really pick up a new tool like generative AI. Like I had some students last year who just learned Midjourney, and I forgot what tool they used to animate the generative AI. Probably Runway.
Yeah.
But they learned it literally in like weeks and did some amazing work. And that gives me the courage that I can learn something like that. Right now, that'd be intimidating for me to pick up and run with. But they're in a pressure cooker in a different situation. But yeah, just like the ability for these people to really just grasp a concept and have just a complete breakthrough in thinking has been really inspiring for me.
It's great. I know the one question you love to hear is like, how would you want to be like remembered? Like, what are the impacts? Because you've already had an amazing impact with students, and soon your book to be out to the masses. And, working with you has been an absolute pleasure, and just, collaborating with someone like you. But like, when you're looking back and you think about the times, what would you want to be reminiscing about or be the impact it had?
And thank you. It's been amazing working with you as well. Like you, again, are one of the people who have really taught me a lot of things too. So thank you so much.
Very kind of you. I appreciate that, man. The reason I don't really think about it. I don't think about like when I die, what's going to be the one thing that's most lasting people remember me for. I don't even think it's about epitaph or death. I think it's about when you have a change and maybe you're doing something different. You have a winery. You're reflecting back. You're just reflecting back on a life well lived and an artist's life. And you think about the things that you've touched and the things that have changed. Like when you're having that glass of wine and you're in the hills of Barcelona, what would you like to be thinking about?
I think just through the work that I've been doing, a lot of it has been trying to like bring making this work more practical and accessible to people. And if I ever had a vision of what does that mean, like when it succeeds, it's been like, I want the world to just be like a more creative and beautiful place. Wouldn't it be great to just walk down the street and have like amazing, and not from a consumer perspective, but see like amazing ideas and products and concepts like really come to life, like manifested, that like things people do have an intention for the greater good. They understand the impact they're going to have. And so they don't do the stupid things that like our primate minds have been doing for a long time, keeping us like animals. And I would love to see more visionary work. And I just feel like it would be nice to believe that, I had a small part to play in things changing for the better. And that's always going to be about perspective, right? Some people will think, there's always two sides to the coin. But if this kind of process, and again, I didn't write any of this process. I've mashed a bunch of things together, but I don't claim any property or ownership around any of this stuff. I'm just trying to package it a little bit differently so that people understand it and they can use it. And I think that concept would be great, that I'd be able to facilitate something that people could use to do amazing stuff. And that's good enough for me. And I can't really put my finger on the very specific amazing outcome that I want. But if it changes the world in a positive way and there's some tiny little part that I had in facilitating, that would be really cool to be able to.
I think to coin a word from McKinsey, you synthesize things well. And I think that's the thing is it's in a lot of places. I do the same and I think you bring the best of different parts to try and give people an easier pathway to learn. So where are you in the world and on the socials and where can people find you and get more information about your work and the book? And I'll put it on the show notes too, but just if you want to share, that would be great.
LinkedIn is always a good place to connect with me. Find me there. I do have my own small consulting practice called Habitat. I know that's a very common name, but it's habitat.design. And that's my consulting practice where I train organizations on futures. And I also do consulting work and actually usher them through the strategic thinking towards strategic initiatives and outcomes, that kind of stuff. And those are the big ones. I don't use Twitter or X anymore. I'm starting to look at Threads, but I'm on both of those platforms. You just Google my name. I think I have a pretty unique last name, so I'm pretty easy to find around there. And right now you can buy the book on Amazon around the world. And I think the other place that O'Reilly doesn't have it for sale on their website. They just use Amazon and ebooks.com if you have an e-reader.
That's great. I just want to say thank you for your time and being generous with that today and sharing your process. And congratulations on this book. I know it's been a long time coming and I can't wait to dive into it even more. I can use it because I've already read it, but I want to read it again. Thank you, Phil. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Steve. Really appreciate it. Great chat.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Think Forward podcast. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms and at www.thinkforwardshow.com, as well as on YouTube under Think Forward Show. See you next time.